What if the coldest billionaire in the city stopped his own birthday celebration to honor his maid? What if the woman who cleaned his floors held the secret to his empire's beginning and his final redemption? As cameras flashed and the world watched, one question silenced the crowd. Why would a man with everything give it all away to the one person everyone ignored? The answer left the world in tears and changed a life forever. If this story touched your heart, imagine what's coming next. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss our next emotional twist, hidden truth, or life-changing story that will leave you speechless. The Blackwood Mansion stood silent beneath the soft glow of dawn, a fortress of glass and marble overlooking the restless city below. Inside, the air was heavy with routine. Every sound, every movement had its place. The clinking of silver, the quiet hum of the espresso machine, the rhythmic sweep of the mop across the hallway floor, all parts of a symphony conducted by one woman, Maria. For 12 years, Maria had moved through these halls like a ghost of kindness. She never spoke unless spoken to, never complained, and never faltered in her duties. Her hands were worn, her back slightly bent from years of labor, yet her spirit remained soft, like sunlight filtering through dusty curtains. The mansion staff often overlooked her, the guests barely noticed her. But she noticed everything: the dust on the chandelier before a dinner, the creak of the old West Wing door, the moods of her employer, Ethan Blackwood. Ethan, the man whose name carried both awe and fear in the corporate world. He built an empire from the ashes of his past and had the kind of power that made boardrooms tremble. Cold, calculated, and distant, he was known for seeing the world not in colors, but in numbers. To most, he was a man carved from marble, untouchable and unfeeling. Yet this morning, something about him was different. He stood by the window of his study, untouched coffee growing cold beside him. The usual morning calls were left unanswered. The city sprawled beneath him like an empire waiting for orders, but his gaze was elsewhere, far beyond the skyline. Maria entered quietly with a tray, setting down his breakfast with the same precision as always. Her movements were careful, respectful. She didn't expect a thank you. She never did. "Your coffee, sir," she murmured softly. Ethan didn't reply, only nodded faintly without turning his head. The reflection of her figure in the window was small, almost fading into the glass. As she turned to leave, he spoke suddenly. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" Maria paused mid-step, startled. He rarely initiated conversation, not unless it was about work. "Yes, sir," she said, smiling politely. 12 years this spring." 12, he repeated under his breath, as though the number carried a weight only he could feel. "That's a long time." She gave a gentle nod, unsure if she should say more. "I'm grateful for the work, sir." He looked at her then, really looked. The fine lines on her face, the faint tiredness in her eyes, the quiet dignity she carried like an invisible crown. For a fleeting moment, something softened in his expression, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Maria left the room unaware of his gaze following her. Down in the kitchen, she resumed her routine, cleaning the counters, slicing fruit for the other staff's lunch, polishing the silver. It was her birthday today. Not that anyone knew. She hadn't mentioned it in years. Birthdays had become a quiet ritual for her, a single candle lit alone after work, a whispered wish that no longer needed words. Still, a small ache lingered beneath her calm exterior. She thought of her late husband, of her daughter studying abroad who could only afford short phone calls. She hummed an old Spanish lullaby to fill the silence, a tune her mother once sang. Through the reflection on the kitchen glass, she caught sight of Ethan again, standing near the grand staircase. He wasn't on his phone nor giving orders. He was simply watching her, as if seeing her for the first time. Maria quickly looked away, thinking perhaps she had imagined it. The day carried on as usual, meetings upstairs, cleaning downstairs, lunch trays, laundry cycles, the tick-tock rhythm of service. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, something subtle was shifting. like the quiet tension before a storm. Ethan skipped his usual meeting with his CFO. He sent the driver away early. He seemed preoccupied. By evening, the mansion glowed under the soft amber of chandeliers. Maria finished polishing the dining table, straightening the cutlery for dinner she wouldn't be joining. She sighed softly, glancing at the clock. Another day done, another birthday spent unseen. But somewhere upstairs, Ethan Blackwood was still standing by that window, staring into the darkening horizon. A glass of untouched scotch shimmered in his hand. His reflection looked back at him, proud, wealthy, and yet haunted, and as the first stars appeared over the city, he whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "By nightfall, nothing in this house will be the same again." The sun had long slipped beneath the horizon when Maria finished scrubbing the last of the marble steps. The mansion's stillness was broken only by the occasional echo of heels, event planners rushing through corridors, florists bringing in towering vases of white lilies, and chefs shouting last-minute instructions. Something big was happening that evening, but Maria assumed it was one of Mr. Blackwood's high-profile business gatherings. They happened often. She simply worked around them and stayed out of sight. But tonight felt different. The entire mansion was alive. Chandeliers blazed like fire, and gold ribbons framed the entrance doors. A black carpet stretched from the gate to the main hall, lined with photographers waiting to capture glimpses of the city's elite. Maria watched from the servants' quarters window as luxury cars rolled in, sleek, polished, silent except for the occasional engine hum. She could almost feel the pulse of wealth vibrating through the air. While she folded napkins in the side pantry, a young butler appeared, holding an ivory envelope. He looked nervous. "Miss Maria?" She turned, confused. Yes." He held out the envelope with both hands. "Mr. Blackwood asked that I deliver this to you personally." Maria hesitated before taking it. Her name was written in bold, elegant script. She had seen the handwriting before, Ethan's. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded the thick card. "You are cordially invited to attend a private birthday dinner this evening at 8 o'clock sharp. Formal attire required. Ethan Blackwood." Her breath caught. She looked up at the butler, startled. There must be some mistake. Tonight's his birthday, not... He shook his head. "No mistake, ma'am. Mr. Blackwood was very specific." When he left, Maria stood frozen. Why would Ethan, the man who barely spoke to her beyond instructions, invite her to his own birthday dinner? She thought of refusing. It didn't seem right, a maid among billionaires. But a small voice inside whispered that maybe this was a gesture of kindness, perhaps gratitude. She glanced at the clock. Half an hour until 8. Her wardrobe was humble. A few pressed uniforms, a worn cardigan, and a single dress she hadn't worn in years. Dark blue, simple but neatly kept. She brushed her hair, fastened the old silver locket around her neck, and looked at her reflection. The woman staring back looked tired but gentle, dignified despite the years of servitude. When she stepped into the grand hall, the air shifted. Guests filled the room, their laughter mingling with the clinking of glasses. Cameras flashed as reporters hovered near the velvet ropes. Women wore sequined gowns, men in tailored suits. And then, as Maria entered quietly, the music seemed to falter for a moment. Heads turned. "Who's that?" a woman whispered behind a jeweled fan. "Isn't she the maid?" Another muttered, her tone sharp with disbelief. "What is she doing here?" Someone else sneered softly. Maria's cheeks burned. She lowered her gaze and moved to a corner, wishing she could disappear into the walls. Every glance felt like a spotlight, every whisper a dagger. Across the hall, Ethan Blackwood stood at the center table, perfectly composed in a black suit. The crowd orbited him like planets around the sun. His expression was calm, too calm. When his eyes met Maria's from across the room, he didn't look surprised. He didn't look curious. He looked deliberate. Maria quickly turned away, pretending to admire the floral arrangements. She tried to steady her breathing. Maybe he hadn't meant for her to stand among the guests. Maybe she had misunderstood. But then Ethan's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep tone silencing the murmurs. "Thank you for joining me tonight. The crowd turned to him, smiling, glasses raised. "It's been a long year," he continued. "Successes, losses, and lessons that remind me of what truly matters." His words were smooth, but his gaze drifted again, not to the investors, not to the politicians, but directly toward Maria. Her heart began to pound. Behind her, someone whispered mockingly, "Maybe she's his secret charity case." Laughter followed, is low, cruel and short-lived as Ethan's hand lifted. Commanding silence, the music faded completely. A hush fell. He took a slow sip of wine, eyes scanning the faces before him, then returning to hers. The weight of the moment hung like static in the air. Maria's fingers clenched around her locket, unsure whether to leave or stay. Then Ethan placed his glass down and raised his voice, calm but heavy with meaning. "Tonight," he said, letting each word echo against marble and glass, "I want to talk about the most important person in my life." The crowd straightened, curious. Some smiled knowingly, expecting a business partner, a lost friend, perhaps a secret lover. Maria, standing at the edge of the room, felt every heartbeat thrum in her ears. Ethan's eyes didn't leave hers, and as silence swallowed the hall, everyone waited to hear a name that would shock them all. The grand hall had gone silent, so silent that even the chandeliers seemed to stop shimmering. All eyes were on Ethan Blackwood, as he stood beneath the golden light, his glass untouched, his expression unreadable. He took a slow breath before speaking again. "Before I tell you who this person is," he said, voice steady but heavy with emotion, "I want to tell you a story." The crowd shifted, murmurs fading into anticipation. Ethan wasn't a man who spoke about the past. His life to the world had always begun at success, not before it. "Many years ago," he began, pacing slowly, "there was a young man, reckless, arrogant, and proud. He built a business that crumbled faster than it rose. Overnight, he lost everything. His partners left, his friends vanished, and the city that once cheered his name turned its back." He paused, eyes distant as if reliving the fall. He spent nights in alleys and cheap motels, surviving on coffee and regret. He had no family, no hope, and no reason to keep going. Maria stood frozen at the far end of the room. The story tugged at her heart, though she couldn't imagine what it had to do with her. She clasped her locket tighter, the one that held her daughter's picture, her only treasure. Ethan's voice softened. One night, when it rained endlessly, he collapsed outside a small apartment building. A woman found him there, a maid who worked long hours cleaning homes for people who never learned her name. She didn't ask who he was or what he had done. She brought him inside, gave him soup, and told him, "The world can take everything from you, but not your kindness." Maria's breath caught. Those words, she had said them once, years ago, to a stranger who had knocked on her door, drenched, trembling, and hungry. A man whose name she never knew, Ethan continued, his voice lower now, almost breaking. That woman saved his life. She didn't know it, but her kindness gave him the strength to start again. He promised himself that if he ever found her again, he'd return what she gave him, hope. The crowd was utterly still. The whispers had vanished, replaced by wide eyes and held breaths. Even the reporters forgot their cameras. Ethan turned then, his gaze locking on Maria. The recognition in her eyes was slow, dawning like sunrise after a long night. Her lips parted in disbelief. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stepped down from the dais, every click of his shoes echoing through the marble hall. The guests parted as he approached her, the space between them shrinking, until he stood close enough for her to see the faint shimmer in his eyes. "You once opened your door to a man who had nothing," he said softly. "That man was me." Gasps rippled across the hall. Cameras clicked, flashes burst her, but for Maria the world blurred. She saw not the billionaire before her, but the broken young man she once nursed back to strength. His beard untrimmed, his eyes hollow, and the way he'd said thank you before disappearing at dawn. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't know," she whispered. "You were nobody," he finished gently. "And yet you treated me like somebody." For a long moment neither spoke. The room held its breath, the titan of industry, and the woman who once mended his spirit standing face to face after 12 long years. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ivory envelope. He held it out with both hands, a gesture of humility so foreign to those who knew him that even the guests lowered their eyes. "You gave me hope when I had nothing," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "Today I return what you gave me, a life worth living." Maria stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. Her heart raced. Around her, whispers swelled again. "What's in it?" someone muttered. "Money?" Another guessed. "Property?" "Maybe it's a check. He's buying her silence." But Ethan didn't speak again. He only watched her, expression unreadable as she slowly opened the envelope. Her fingers quivered against the paper. Inside was a single folded document, embossed with a gold seal. She unfolded it, eyes scanning the words, and froze. Her lips parted, color draining from her face. The guests leaned forward, desperate to see, to know. Maria looked up at Ethan, voice barely a whisper. "Sir, this can't be real." Ethan said nothing. Only that faint, knowing smile curved his lips. The crowd erupted in confusion. Reporters pushed forward, cameras flashing like lightning. Maria clutched the paper to her chest, eyes glistening with disbelief. "What did he give her?" a woman demanded. "What's in the envelope?" Ethan turned back toward the stage, his silhouette framed by the golden chandeliers. "Some gifts," he said quietly, almost to himself, "speak louder than words." And as Maria stood trembling, the letter still in her hands, the world around her blurred into silence once more, right before everything changed. The hall was frozen in stunned silence. The weight of what had just unfolded pressed down on every breath, every heartbeat. Maria's trembling fingers clutched the paper, her eyes scanning the gold-lettered document again and again, as though her mind refused to believe what her eyes already knew. The mansion. The entire Blackwood estate, and one of Ethan's most profitable company branches, all signed, sealed, and transferred in her name. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. The chatter grew frantic, disbelieving, almost panicked. "She owns all of this? Is this a joke? Why would he give her that?" Maria looked up, her vision blurred with tears. "Sir, I can't. This isn't right," she stammered. "I'm just a maid." Ethan took a step toward her, his eyes soft but resolute. The calm in his face silenced the noise around them. "No, Maria," he said quietly. "You're the reason this home ever felt alive. You believed in a man no one else would. You gave me a reason to start over when I had nothing. You deserve everything good in this world." Her voice broke. "But, sir, this is too much." He smiled faintly, a sad, tired smile that carried both warmth and weariness. "You gave me life when I was dead inside. This isn't charity, Maria, it's justice." The crowd had gone still again. Even the cynical whispers had faded. Something sacred filled the space, the quiet gravity of gratitude. Then Ethan wavered slightly. His hand trembled as he reached for a chair, gripping the edge. Maria rushed forward instinctively, supporting him before anyone else could move. "Mr. Blackwood." "Are you all right?" He steadied himself, giving her a reassuring nod, though the color had drained from his face. He turned toward the audience, his voice softer now, fragile but still dignified. "There's something else I must tell you," he said, pausing to catch his breath. "In all my years building this empire, I've learned that time is the one thing no amount of money can buy." He looked back at Maria, and the room seemed to shrink until there was only the two of them. "My doctors gave me a year," he confessed. 6 months ago." A collective gasp escaped the crowd. Maria's heart clenched. "No," she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "I spent too long chasing numbers, forgetting faces. But when I saw you again, still here after all these years, it reminded me of who I used to be, and who I still wanted to be before time ran out." Tears streamed freely down Maria's face. She tried to speak, but words failed her. Ethan reached out, his hand finding hers. His palm was cold but steady. "Don't cry," he murmured gently. "This was never about goodbye. It's about what we leave behind. You showed me that legacy isn't built from glass towers or stock shares. It's built from kindness." Around them, even the most stoic guests lowered their eyes. The woman who had mocked Maria earlier dabbed her tears quietly with a napkin. The cameras no longer flashed. No one dared break the sacred stillness. Maria knelt slightly, holding Ethan's hand to her forehead. "You didn't owe me anything, sir," she whispered. "You've already repaid me 1,000 times tonight." Ethan smiled faintly, his voice barely audible. "Then promise me one thing. Keep this house filled with laughter, not silence. Promise me it'll always feel like home." "I promise," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan exhaled slowly, as if releasing a lifetime of burdens. "Good," he said softly. "Then I can rest easy knowing my home is finally in the right hands." That night the party ended without music, without fanfare, only quiet awe. The guests left whispering about what they had witnessed, unsure whether they'd attended a birthday celebration or something holier. Months later, a light drizzle fell over the Blackwood family cemetery. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and lilies. Maria stood before Ethan's grave, wearing the same simple blue dress she had worn that night. The mansion papers were still safely kept in her drawer, but she hadn't changed much, still humble, still kind, still the heart of a house that now belonged to her. She traced her fingers gently over his name carved in stone. "You were always the kind one, sir," she whispered, voice trembling. "You just needed someone to remind you." The wind stirred, rustling the nearby roses she had planted herself, his favorite kind. She smiled faintly, wiping away a tear, and turned to leave. As she walked back toward the mansion on the hill, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over everything Ethan had left behind. Somewhere in the quiet of the gardens, it almost felt like his voice lingered, warm, steady. At peace. Some gifts can't be wrapped. They can only be remembered.